Chapter 1. The ocean floor was already littered with corpses when Nicera arrived. The trench walls vibrated. A heavy shockwave tore through the freezing water. Nicera didn't flinch. She simply watched the sediment cloud the dark depths. She didn't come to help. She came to see what kind of monster could survive her touch. Ahead, a massive serpentine beast lay motionless against the rocks, and standing over it was the king of the tides, or what was left of him. Thalric's back was turned. Glowing, jagged coral pierced through his skin, crawling up his spine like a twisted armor of rot. He was panting, his broad shoulders heaving with every ragged breath. The madness of the coral rot had consumed him. He was no longer a sovereign. He was a feral, cornered predator. "Don't go near him." Morel's voice was a barely audible tremor. The blind child huddled behind a cluster of volcanic rock, her small hands covering her ears. "He doesn't know who he is anymore," Morel whispered. "The currents say he is completely gone." "He is loud," Nicera said flatly. "And I despise loud things." She stepped out of the shadows. The temperature in the water plummeted. Thalric whipped around. There was no recognition in his face. His eyes, once a legendary crystalline blue, were pitch black and bleeding gold at the edges. His jaw was locked. He bared his teeth, a low, guttural growl vibrating through the water, shaking the very rocks beneath their feet. "Leave." The word was distorted, scraped raw from a throat unaccustomed to speech. "No," Nicera said. She didn't slow her pace. Thalric lunged, the water displaced with the force of a bomb. He slammed into her, driving her backward until her spine hit the sheer rock wall of the trench. The impact cracked the stone. He pinned her there, his massive hands clamped over her shoulders. The heat rolling off his body was suffocating, burning through the icy depths. "I said leave," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You don't give me orders," Nicera replied. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't struggle. She stared directly into the golden madness of his eyes. Thalric froze. His nostrils flared. He breathed in. The aggression in his posture faltered, replaced by a sudden violent shudder. His grip tightened, not to hurt, but to anchor himself. He leaned closer, his nose brushing the curve of her jaw. "You smell like..." He choked on the words, his body trembling violently against hers. Cold, dark, like the abyss. Nicera didn't wait for his permission. She didn't push him away. She raised her right hand and drove her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over the jagged, glowing coral that encased his heart. "What are you doing?" he demanded. His voice cracked, a dangerous rumble of warning. "Quiet." She pulled. The water around them hissed, boiling from the sudden clash of energy. Black, inky veins rushed up Nicera's pale arm. She absorbed the coral rot, dragging the agonizing curse out of his flesh and into her own. Thalric's body arched violently against the rock. A broken sound tore from his throat, half agony, half something dangerously close to pleasure. He stumbled backward, releasing her. He dropped to one knee, clutching his chest. The jagged coral didn't disappear, but the sickly glow died out. Slowly, he lifted his head. The pitch black had receded from his eyes. The gold was gone. Staring back at her were eyes of piercing, lucid blue. The feral beast was dead. The king had returned. But as he looked at her, the atmosphere shifted. The heavy, oppressive weight of an ancient instinct snapped into place between them. The air grew impossibly dense. The mate bond. It didn't feel like fate. It felt like something ancient had just locked a chain around both their throats. Thalric stopped breathing. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling in sharp, jagged rhythms. He looked at her not just with clarity, but with a sudden, terrifying hunger. The feral madness was gone, only to be replaced by complete, obsessive clarity. "You took the pain away," he murmured. He pushed himself to his feet. His towering frame cast a heavy shadow over her. "How?" "I ate it," Nicera said, her face an unreadable mask. "Don't get used to it." She pushed past him, heading toward the deep drop-off. "Stop." It wasn't a growl this time. It was a command, absolute and undeniable. Nicera paused, looking over her shoulder. "Your crown means nothing down here, Thalric. Keep your voice down." He closed the distance in a fraction of a second. He didn't attack. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His fingers wrapped around her cold skin, his touch searing, possessive, and unyielding. "Who are you?" he demanded softly. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there for a fraction of a second too long before snapping back to her eyes. "Why did you do that?" "Because your thrashing was ruining my hunting grounds." She yanked her arm. His grip didn't budge. He stepped closer, invading her space until there was no water left between them. "Try again," he whispered. "Let go of me." "No." His jaw tightened. "You are not walking away. Not from me." Nicera's eyes narrowed. She didn't waste time arguing. She shifted her weight, channeling the freezing currents, and blasted a wave of dark pressure directly into his chest. The impact forced him to let go. Thalric hit the sea floor, his energy completely drained from the sudden withdrawal of the curse. He fell to his knees, gasping for breath. Nicera turned and began to ascend into the pitch-black water. Before she could swim out of reach, a massive hand shot out. Thalric's fingers clamped around her ankle like a vice of iron and heat. "If you leave," he rasped, tightening his grip. He didn't look up, but his voice vibrated with a dark, desperate need. "I will hunt you to the edge of the abyss, and I will not stop." Nicera looked down at the broken king, her expression entirely devoid of pity. From the shadows of the rocks, Morel tilted her blind eyes upward. The child gripped her ragged dress, speaking to the empty sea. "She will drag him to the bottom," the child's voice broke, "and he will beg her not to stop." Chapter 2. The abyssal cave was pitch black, a dead zone where not even the currents dared to whisper. Nicera dropped Thalric onto the obsidian floor. He hit the stone hard, his massive frame shuddering as the remnants of his curse fought the dark energy she had left inside him. "Stay here," she ordered, turning her back to him. "If you wander out, the deep god's hounds will tear you to pieces." "I was a king," Thalric rasped from the dark. He pushed himself up, leaning heavily against the cavern wall. "Now you're just something rotting too slowly," Nicera countered, looking over her shoulder. "Don't flatter yourself." She moved toward the cave's exit. Crack. The sound of tearing flesh echoed through the water. The sharp, metallic scent of blood instantly flooded the tight space, thick and heavy. Nicera spun around. Thalric stood tall, holding a jagged shard of volcanic glass in his left hand. He had dragged it right across his right forearm. Dark crimson smoke drifted from the deep wound, dissolving into the freezing water. He didn't flinch. He just stared at her. "What did you do?" Nicera's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "I am bleeding," Thalric said flatly. He tossed the glass aside. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Fix it." Nicera stared at him in disbelief. "I am not your healer. I took the rot to keep you quiet, not to nurse you." "Then let me bleed out." He stepped closer. The blood flowed faster, pooling around his boots. His blue eyes locked onto hers. Dark, hungry, and entirely unhinged. "You want to see how long I last?" He challenged, stopping just inches from her face. Watch. Nicera's jaw tightened. She hated being manipulated, but the scent of his blood was driving the abyss inside her wild. With a vicious snarl, she grabbed his bleeding arm. Her cold fingers dug directly into his torn flesh. But the moment her skin met his open blood, a violent shockwave slammed into them both. Nicera gasped as a terrifying flash of his madness. Drowning subjects, burning coral, a mind shattering into pieces, clawed violently into her brain. Thalric choked, his body arching as he absorbed the sheer, crushing emptiness of her soul. It wasn't a healing, it was a catastrophic collision. The dark energy fought the curse, tearing at his veins before forcefully stitching the skin back together. Thalric stumbled back, gasping for air. He looked at his closed arm, then up at her. The obsession in his gaze burned hotter, twisted with a new dark euphoria. "You're poisoning me," he whispered, his chest heaving. "And you are infecting me," she hissed, wiping his blood from her palm. "Never do that again." Before he could take another step, a small voice broke the heavy silence. From a pitch-black corner, Morel tilted her head. Her blind eyes widened in terror. "The water stopped moving," the child whispered, her small hands clutching her ragged dress. "The light, it is smiling at us." Nicera froze. The freezing dark of the trench vanished. The currents completely died. The water became unnervingly, perfectly still, and then it turned scalding. Aurelian. A glowing ethereal chain of light manifested out of the stagnant water. It wrapped violently around Nicera's chest, pulling tight with the force of a collapsing star. The pressure bond. Nicera was thrown to the floor. The invisible weight crushed her lungs, forcing the air from her chest. The holy light burned her abyssal skin, branding her with the mark of the chosen. "Nicera!" Thalric lunged forward. "Get back!" she shrieked, her voice distorted by the crushing force. The bond pulled upward, trying to drag her out of the cave. Aurelian was reeling her in. He was trying to force her to submit. Nicera stopped fighting the pull. She dropped to her knees, her head bowing under the immense pressure. Thalric watched in horror. Was she surrendering? No. Nicera raised her hands. Her nails extended into jagged obsidian claws. She didn't reach for the golden chain. She reached for herself. She drove her claws directly into her own chest, right over her heart. "Stop!" Thalric roared. "I will not be leashed," she screamed back, tearing at her own flesh, trying to carve the magical anchor out of her body. Blood drifted from her collarbone, black and heavy. She would rather rip herself apart than let Aurelian control her. Thalric stared at her. His heart pounded against his ribs. He saw the feral, terrifying length she would go to for her freedom. She was magnificent. She was entirely out of her mind, and he was entirely hers. The cavern ceiling suddenly ruptured. A blinding, massive pillar of holy light tore through the deep, striking the ocean floor like a divine spear. The impact shook the very foundations of the world. The pressure bond flared, bringing Nicera to the ground. Dark, bloody tears wept from her eyes under the agonizing strain. Then a sickeningly gentle voice whispered directly into her ear. It was soft, devoid of anger, yet laced with absolute terrifying authority. "Submit, abyssal child. It is only justice." Nicera closed her eyes, waiting for the final crush. It never came. A deafening roar shattered the silent water. Thalric threw himself forward. He didn't use magic. He used his body. He stepped directly over Nicera, planting his boots into the fractured stone. The holy light slammed into his back. The jagged coral armor beneath his skin violently snapped and cracked. reigniting the agonizing curse. But Thalric didn't fall. He spread his arms wide, a massive shield of flesh and bone, taking the full devastating brunt of the divine strike. He looked down at Nicera, his flesh burning, his eyes blazing with absolute defiance. "I will drag this entire ocean to its grave," Thalric snarled, his voice vibrating through the still water, "before I let him take you." Chapter 3. The blinding pillar of light did not fade. It pressed down with the weight of a dying sun. Thalric's knees buckled, but he didn't drop. The jagged coral bursting through his skin hissed and smoked under the divine heat. The curse he had just been freed from was violently returning, feeding on the holy energy. Through the scalding, unnervingly still water, a figure descended. Aurelian did not swim. He simply drifted down, his white and gold robes untouched by the violent displacement he had caused. He didn't carry a weapon. His presence alone was an execution. "You shield a monster, fallen king," Aurelian said. His voice was devastatingly gentle, slipping through the water like a velvet blade. "How tragically poetic. The rot consumes your mind, and now the abyss claims your soul." "Don't speak to me of rot," Thalric snarled, his muscles trembling under the crushing light. Blood dripped from his clenched jaw. "You are trespassing in my domain." Aurelian finally touched the cavern floor. The stone beneath his boots instantly turned to white ash. "Your domain?" Aurelian smiled. It was a terrifying, serene expression. "This graveyard is not a kingdom, Thalric. It is a crime scene, and you are merely the last evidence." Nicera watched from beneath Thalric's massive shadow. The pressure bond around her chest was suffocating, but the anger burning in her veins was hotter. "What does he mean?" she hissed. Aurelian's golden eyes flicked to her. "He doesn't know. The madness took his memory, but the blood remembers. Centuries ago, his ancestors drowned my people in liquid coral. They buried an entire civilization alive to secure their throne." Thalric's jaw clamped. His claws dug into the seabed, violently shattering the rock beneath him. A sudden phantom taste of ash and boiling blood flooded his mouth, a genetic memory, dark and undeniable, ripping through his fragile mind. "You lie," Thalric rasped, but the slight tremor in his voice was a confession. "Do I?" Aurelian took a slow step forward. "You mourn the ocean's decay. You call it a tragedy. I call it karma. The sea is not dying, Thalric. It is being sanitized." Aurelian raised a single finger. The weight of the light doubled. Thalric finally dropped to one knee. A sickening crack echoed through the cave as his collarbone fractured under the pressure. The golden light began to burn through his flesh, aiming straight for Nicera. "You end today," Aurelian whispered softly. "The sickness and the illusion that it deserves to live." Nicera's vision blurred with black spots. The holy magic was trying to erase her existence. She looked at Thalric. His head was bowed, his breathing ragged, his body sacrificing itself to buy her seconds. He was breaking. A feral, uncontrollable rage snapped inside Nicera. "No one breaks him but me," she whispered. She slammed both her palms onto the cavern floor. The ocean did not tremble. It shattered. A massive, violent explosion of pure abyssal ink erupted from the stone beneath them. It wasn't just dark. It was an absolute sensory void. The black water swallowed the holy light instantly, plunging the cavern into suffocating blindness. Aurelian's serene composure fractured. "Wretched creature!" Nicera didn't hesitate. She grabbed Thalric by his ruined collar. "Move," she ordered, funneling her dark energy into the current, rocketing them both backward into the deepest, narrowest trench of the abyss. but Aurelian's magic did not let go easily. As she tore them into the shadows, the pressure bond violently tightened around her chest. The golden chain seared completely through her abyssal armor. Crack! A sickening hollow sound echoed deep inside Nicera's chest. It wasn't bone. The very core of her being splintered. A permanent, agonizing cold seeped into her lungs, and her left hand instantly went entirely numb. She had ripped herself free, but the damage was permanent. The silence returned to the cavern. Slowly, the abyssal ink dissolved. The holy light reclaimed the empty space. Aurelian stood alone. His immaculate robes were stained with a single drop of black water. He looked at it, his expression hardening into cold, calculating ice. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He slowly turned his head toward the far corner of the ruined cave. 2 figures were pinned against the wall by glowing, golden halos. Velka, the ancient sea witch, was snarling, her hands bound. Beside her, Mirel was trembling uncontrollably. Aurelian floated toward them. He stopped in front of the blind child. He reached out, his glowing hand gently cupping her terrified face. "If the beast will not come to the leash," Aurelian whispered, his voice dripping with terrifying sweetness, "we will simply bleed the lamb." Mirel let out a choked gasp. She didn't just feel the threat. She felt the very fabric of her destiny writhing in agony. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was stolen. Deep inside her milky white eyes, a single glowing blue thread, the living, breathing string that connected her to the ocean's currents, violently snapped. Chapter 4. The trench was dead silent. Nicera leaned heavily against the jagged basalt wall. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side, completely numb. Deep inside her chest, the fractured abyssal core radiated a slow, agonizing freeze. Thalric watched her. His fractured collarbone was already knitting itself back together, driven by the unnatural stamina of the rot. He didn't step toward her, but his presence expanded, the sheer weight of his attention filling the narrow cavern, suffocating and absolute. "You're hurt," he said. The roughness in his voice left no room for debate. "I am fine." Nicera didn't look at him. Before he could demand the truth, the water between them violently warped. A sickly green spark ignited in the dark, expanding into a swirling projection of light. Velka's face materialized. The sea witch looked ragged, her eyes wide with panic. "Child of the void," Velka's voice distorted through the currents. "Listen to me. He has the blind girl. He is preparing the altar at the sanctum." Nicera's jaw clenched. "Then I will tear the sanctum down." "You cannot," Velka shrieked. "Aurelian is not just a zealot. He is a failsafe. I saw it in the currents, Nicera. If your abyss fully bonds with his coral rot, it will not heal the ocean. It will boil it dry." Thalric froze. "You are the apocalypse," Velka sobbed. "Aurelian's purge is the only thing keeping the world from burning. If you stay together, everything dies." The green light violently shattered. The message was cut off. A heavy, crushing weight dropped over the trench. The absolute truth of Velka's words settled into the freezing water. Nicera felt the splintered edges of her core pulse in agreement. Thalric shook his head. "She is lying. It's a trick to divide us." "It isn't." Nicera finally turned to look at him. "Nicera." He stepped into her space. He didn't touch her, but the oppressive heat of his aura boxed her in. His voice was frantic, entirely stripped of his regal composure. "We can fight him. We tear the sea apart if we have to. I do not care about the ocean anymore. I only care about you." He meant it. The king of the tides was ready to let his kingdom turn to ash, just to keep her. "You are a king, Thalric," she whispered. "I am nothing without you. Nicera looked up into his fierce, panicked blue eyes. She raised her good hand and cupped the side of his face. Her thumb brushed over his jawline. Thalric's breath hitched. He instantly lowered his guard, his eyes fluttering shut as he surrendered completely to her touch. Nicera pulled him down and pressed her lips to his. For a fraction of a second, it was a kiss, soft, desperate, and deeply tragic. Then she bit down on his lower lip. Hard, blood immediately rushed into her mouth. Thalric let out a muffled groan of surprise, his eyes snapping open. But Nicera didn't back away. She opened the floodgates of her fractured core, forcing pure, undiluted abyssal toxicity directly into his mouth, driving the lethal darkness straight into his bloodstream. Thalric shoved her away, stumbling backward. He hit the stone floor hard, choking violently. Black, inky veins exploded across his neck and jaw. The coral rot inside him screamed as the heavy, toxic darkness collided with it. "What?" He gagged, spitting black blood onto the sand. "What did you do?" "I am giving you an anchor," she said coldly. Thalric arched backward, a raw, guttural scream tearing from his throat. The pain felt like his veins were filling with crushed glass and ice. "Stop," he begged, his fingers clawing desperately at the stone. "Nicera, please, it's tearing me apart." Nicera didn't flinch. She raised her hand. Thick, heavy chains of solid black water erupted from the trench floor. They whipped around Thalric's wrists and ankles, slamming him back against the rock, locking him in place through sheer atmospheric pressure. She stood over him. Her eyes were empty, devoid of any warmth or mercy. "If pain is the only way to keep you alive," Nicera whispered, her voice slicing through his agony, "then suffer." Thalric stared up at her, betrayal and obsession warring in his breaking mind. He choked on another wave of black blood, his body violently mutating. Nicera turned her face toward the distant golden light of the surface, preparing to leave him in the dark. Then she stopped. For a fraction of a second, the abyssal sovereign broke. Her right hand, the one that had just forced the agonizing poison into his veins, began to tremble violently. A single, ragged breath hitched in her throat, sharp and uncontrolled. She closed her eyes, fighting the overwhelming urge to drop back to her knees and hold him. She curled her trembling fingers into a tight fist, burying the weakness deep inside her shattered core, and swam toward the sanctum. Chapter 5. The Sanctum of Tides was a monument to suffocating perfection. White marble pillars stretched upward into the blinding golden water. There were no shadows. The absolute purity of the holy light burned against Nicera's skin the moment she crossed the threshold. Aurelian stood waiting at the high altar. Two towering constructs of solid light stood beside him, holding Velka and Mirel by the neck. "You did not bring the monster," Aurelian noted softly. "He is dead," Nicera lied, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. "The rot took him. You won." Aurelian tilted his head. "If he is dead, why does your soul still violently reject the light? You are lying, abyssal child." "But it does not matter." He floated down from the altar. He merely pointed a finger at the blind child's trembling hand. A razor-sharp thread of golden light flicked across Mirel's palm. Mirel gasped. A single dark drop of crimson drifted upward from the cut. "Stop!" Nicera lunged forward. A crushing wall of holy pressure slammed her onto her knees. The broken half of her core couldn't fight back. The invisible weight forced her head down. Aurelian guided the drop of innocent blood into the golden chalice. The clear water instantly turned a deep, unnatural red. "I tried to love this ocean once, Nicera," Aurelian whispered. his golden eyes stripped away their chilling serenity, revealing a terrifying, ancient sorrow. I truly did, but they drowned my compassion in liquid coral. You cannot save a rotting world by weeping over it. You must burn it out. Nicera's head dropped. For the first time, she stopped fighting the holy pressure, the sheer, suffocating exhaustion of carrying the abyss, of fracturing her own soul, of destroying the only man she loved. It finally shattered her defenses. Her shoulders sagged under the golden chains. She closed her eyes, leaning into the agonizing light, completely surrendering. She was so tired. She just wanted the pain to stop. Aurelian pressed the cold gold chalice against her lips. "Submit, my child," he commanded softly, "and rest." Nicera parted her lips. The metallic scent of the blood brushed her tongue. Drip. Aurelian paused. A single thick drop of pitch-black water seeped upward through the pristine solid white marble at his feet. Then the floor began to vibrate. A low rhythmic thumping echoed from beneath the sanctum, slow, heavy, and devastating. Thump, thump, like the heartbeat of a leviathan waking in the dark. The holy light radiating from the pillars violently flickered. The water temperature plummeted to absolute zero. "What is this?" Aurelian's mask of control finally fractured. He stepped back from the altar. The white stone groaned, bowing upward under an impossible dark pressure. "You forgot one thing about the abyss," Nicera whispered. Her eyes snapped open, a cruel, bloody smile stretching across her pale face as she felt the familiar, unhinged presence rising. "It doesn't stay buried." Crash. The marble floor detonated. A massive, violent geyser of pitch-black water obliterated the center of the sanctum. The constructs of light shattered instantly into dust. From the swirling ink, a towering nightmare rose. Thalric was a terrifying amalgamation of abyssal horror and coral rot. Jagged, blackened spikes pierced through his massive frame. His eyes were entirely black, bleeding a violent radioactive blue. He didn't just look dangerous, he looked apocalyptic. He didn't look at Aurelian. His terrifying, obsessive gaze snapped directly to Nicera, the sheer gravity of his stare locking her in place. "Who?" Thalric growled, his voice a distorted, demonic echo that shook the very foundations of the temple. "Told you that you could leave me." Chapter 6. Aurelian did not scream. He channeled every ounce of his holy magic into a blinding shockwave, blasting it directly at the beast. It wasn't enough. Thalric absorbed the holy fire, his blackened armor swallowing the light like a black hole. He moved with a speed that defied his massive size, stepping through the divine flames. "Justice," Thalric growled, his voice dropping the temperature of the room, "is a lie." With a brutal, effortless motion, Thalric slammed his spiked gauntlet into Aurelian's chest, driving the chosen of the deep god backward into the altar. The heavy impact echoed through the sanctum. Aurelian's golden eyes widened in shock. The divine light radiating from his skin violently flickered, dimmed, and then permanently went out. He slumped against the broken stone, just another lifeless statue. But the victory brought no peace. Without Aurelian's magic, the devastating chemical reaction between Thalric's curse and Nicera's darkness completely spiraled out of control. The ocean began to boil. Thick, suffocating black ink poured from Thalric's armor, rapidly infecting the golden waters. The marble pillars dissolved. The sea itself was dying. Nicera stood in the center of the ruin, the dark water wrapped around her, feeding her broken soul. It felt warm. She looked at the spreading decay, and for a terrifying moment, she wanted to let it consume everything. The world had only ever given her pain. Thalric waded through the dissolving ruins. He stopped a few feet away from her. He didn't touch her, but his obsessive gaze traced every inch of her face. He was entirely surrendered to the madness. "The ocean is dying," Nicera whispered, her voice laced with dark temptation. "Because of us." Thalric smiled. It was a brutal, completely unhinged expression. "Do it," he rasped. "Let it all rot. If you die, I will follow you into the abyss." He was entirely serious. Nicera closed her eyes. It would be so easy to rule a dead world together. Cough. A small wet sound broke the heavy silence. Nicera looked past Thalric. In the corner, Morel was clawing at her own throat. The toxic water was suffocating the child. Her lungs were failing. Nicera froze. She looked back at Thalric. He would gladly rule a graveyard if she was by his side. She couldn't let his legacy be a tomb. Nicera took a deliberate step backward. Thalric's unhinged smile faltered. "Nicera?" "You are a king," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "A king needs a kingdom, not a graveyard." "I don't care about the kingdom," he roared. "I know." Nicera raised her right hand and drove it directly into the center of her own chest. She reached straight into the ethereal broken cage of her magic. Her fingers wrapped around her fractured abyssal core. Thalric stopped dead. The absolute horror in his face wiped away the madness. "No," he choked out, his massive frame trembling with pure terror. "Nicera, stop." He lunged forward, but she blasted him back with an impenetrable wall of dark pressure, pinning him to the ruined altar. Nicera gripped her core. Tears spilled over her cold cheeks. She looked at Thalric, who was screaming, fighting the spatial pressure with everything he had. "I love you," Nicera whispered. She looked him dead in the eyes, offering him the cruelest mercy imaginable. "Enough to erase myself." She crushed the core. A catastrophic, blinding white explosion obliterated the sanctum. Chapter 7. The water was perfectly clear. No ink, no boiling heat. The ocean was alive again. The curse was gone. Thalric pushed himself off the ocean floor. His blackened armor had dissolved. He was whole. He didn't care. Panic, absolute and suffocating, seized his chest. He tore through the currents, his eyes scanning the endless blue. "Nicera." There was no answer. "I love you enough to erase myself." Her final words looped in his head, a blade twisting deeper with every second. Then he saw her. She stood on a jagged basalt ledge overlooking the deepest trench. She was completely still. The dark, abyssal aura was gone. She was pale, ethereal, and terrifyingly pristine. Thalric crashed onto the ledge behind her. The great king dropped to his knees. He didn't pull her to him. He simply reached out, his trembling hands desperately holding the hem of her dark dress. "Nicera," he gasped, his voice breaking. She slowly turned her head. Thalric stopped breathing. He looked up into her eyes. They were empty. The fierce, dangerous fire was gone. Staring back at him was a vast, unreadable blankness. It was the face of a beautiful statue. "Why are you kneeling?" she asked. Her voice was an inorganic whisper, a sound completely stripped of a soul. Thalric's chest caved in. A tear escaped his eye, tracing a warm path down his cheek before mixing with the sea. "Do you?" His voice fractured. He gripped her dress tighter. "Do you remember me?" Nicera looked down at him. She reached out, her cold, pale fingers brushing his wet cheek. It was an observation of a foreign object. "I know your name," she stated softly. "Thalric, King of the Tides." "I'm not asking about my crown," he begged. "I'm asking about us." Nicera let her hand fall back to her side. "I know I belong to you," she said. her hollow voice cutting through the water. But I no longer understand what that means. Thalric froze. The absolute finality of her words crushed him. The woman who had sacrificed everything for him was dead. The entity standing before him had forgotten what love was. Thalric waited for a reaction, a flicker of pain, a shadow of regret. There was nothing. Nysera simply stepped back. She gently pulled the fabric of her dress from his trembling fingers and faded into the dark blue. Thalric didn't scream. He didn't chase her. He lowered his head, staring at his empty hands. He stayed on the ledge, not as a king returning to his throne, not as a lover waiting for a return, but as a man kneeling in the quiet sea, guarding a memory she no longer owned.